I took care of our farm for 15 years. Every acre of this land holds a story I helped write. So when my mother spoke those words, "Your cousin is taking over. He's more qualified," it felt like every grain of soil that had passed through my hands was witnessing that betrayal. It was harvest day when everything changed. The wheat field stretched before me like a golden ocean as I oversaw the final crop of the season. The walkie-talkie on my belt crackled with Pete's voice. "Our foreman for over 2 decades. Boss, your mother's looking for you. Sounds urgent." I found her on the porch of the main house, that century-old building that had seen generations of the Anderson family grow up. To my surprise, standing beside her was my cousin Marcus, whom I hadn't seen since my father's funeral 3 years ago. "Sarah," my mother began, her rigid posture contrasting with the relaxed atmosphere of the farm. "Marcus has some interesting ideas to modernize our operation." Marcus leaned against the porch railing like he already owned the place, his hands, free of calluses or any sign of labor, idly playing with his car keys. The same cousin who once sold his share of the inheritance to invest in startups was, now back, talking about precision agriculture and modern management. "Marcus has developed a comprehensive restructuring plan," my mother continued, handing me a folder. "He studied advanced farming techniques at Stanford and has important industry connections." I opened the folder as a breeze carrying the scent of the harvest blew around us. Every page was an insult to everything we had built here. Spreadsheets predicting mass layoffs, preliminary contracts with large corporations, plans to convert our diverse fields into a monoculture of genetically modified soybeans. "The decision has already been made," my mother added, her voice attempting to sound gentle but carrying the weight of a verdict. "The family board voted last night. Marcus takes over next month." I lifted my eyes from the folder, gazing at the land I knew like the back of my hand. The land I had saved from bankruptcy when my father fell ill, turning a struggling farm into a model of sustainable agriculture. The land I had refused to sell 3 times to major corporations because I had promised my father to preserve our family's legacy. "What about our workers?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. "The families that have relied on this farm for generations?" Marcus shrugged, checking his wristwatch. "Progress requires sacrifices, cousin. But don't worry, you can keep your room in the main house. We're considering creating a consultant position for you." Consultant. The word echoed in my mind, like an insult. A consultant on the land I had transformed, the land I knew inch by inch, every variation in the soil. I looked at the marks on my hands, scars from a decade and a half of learning this farm's secrets. "Mom." I tried to stay calm. "Do you remember the state of Anderson Farm when Dad got sick? Do you remember the banks threatening foreclosure, the failed harvests?" She looked away, her fingers nervously clutching the necklace my father had given her on their last wedding anniversary. Of course, she remembered. How could she forget the nights we cried together at the kitchen table, calculating debts that seemed impossible to pay? "Times have changed, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to adapt. Marcus has connections. He knows important people." "Connections?" I interrupted. "Were it connections that saved our crops during the drought of 2019? Were it connections that convinced the regional bank to refinance our debt? Or was it the hard work of people who actually care about this land?" Marcus let out a bored sigh, checking messages on his phone. "Sarah, you did a great job keeping things running, but now we need to think bigger. I already have investors interested in injecting significant capital here." "Investors?" My blood ran cold. "What kind of investors?" "Synthagra Corporation," he answered with a smug smile. "Heard of them? They've been revolutionizing the agricultural sector across the Midwest." Of course I knew Synthagra. I knew them well. They were notorious for buying out struggling family farms, promising the world, and then turning everything into automated operations that left entire communities unemployed. I looked toward the horizon, where Pete and the team were still harvesting, oblivious to the storm brewing. 3 generations of his family had worked this land. His father had taught mine to read the patterns of wind and rain. His youngest daughter was in college thanks to the scholarship program I had implemented for our workers' children. That's when I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about every family that depended on Anderson Farm. And I wouldn't let Marcus destroy everything we had built. "Sarah, there's one more thing," my mother said, pulling another document from the folder. Marcus suggested some immediate changes. I took the paper in my hands, still covered in soil from my morning inspection of the irrigation system. It was an internal memo, already signed by the family board, outlining the urgent modernizations. Each line felt like a stab to the heart. Immediate termination of contracts with local small-scale producers, cancellation of the family-run sustainable agriculture program shutdown of the heritage seed project I had developed with the State University sale of the dairy sector to Synthegra. "This is madness," I murmured, my eyes locked on the last page. "You can't do this. The dairy sector supports dozens of local families." "Actually, we can," Marcus smiled, finally putting away his phone. "You must have missed the last board meeting." "Oh, that's right. You were too busy milking cows to attend." The last meeting. 2 weeks ago, when I had to miss it because we were in the middle of a complicated birth with one of our best dairy cows. Ruby, the cow I had personally saved during a snowstorm 3 years ago. The board voted for a complete restructuring, my mother continued, her voice shrinking with each word. Synthegra made a very attractive strategic partnership offer. Partnership? My voice came out louder than I intended. "Mom, do you know what they did to the Thompsons' farm in the neighboring county? They promised modernization and investment. 6 months later, the Thompson family was bankrupt, and 50 people lost their jobs." "That was different," Marcus interjected, his tone condescending. "The Thompsons lacked vision. They didn't have someone with my experience in charge." Experience. The word sounded as fake as his artificial tan. What experience did a Chicago executive have with pests, droughts, or the unpredictable cycle of the seasons? That's when I noticed something odd in the memo's header. The company's name wasn't just Synthegra Corporation. It was Synthegra Corporation and Marcus Anderson Holdings. "Marcus," I asked slowly, "how long have you been working for Synthegra?" His smile faltered for a split second. "Work is a strong word," Marcus said, adjusting his posture. "Let's just say we have a mutually beneficial partnership." The pieces started falling into place in my mind. Marcus's frequent visits over the past few months, always asking seemingly innocent questions about our production. His sudden interest in financial reports. The mysterious calls my mother had been receiving. "You're selling the farm to them." It wasn't a question. All this talk about modernization is just a front. "Sarah," my mother tried to intervene, but Marcus cut her off. "Let's be realistic," he said, taking off his sunglasses. "Synthegra is paying 10 times what this farm is worth. Every family member is getting a generous payout. You could finally leave this backwater place and have a real life." "A real life?" I repeated, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "And what happens to the 30 families who depend on this land, to the contracts we have with small local producers?" "Don't be naive," Marcus rolled his eyes. "Family farming is a thing of the past. The future is automation, large-scale production. Synthegra already has plans to turn all of this into a fully mechanized operation." "And you get a nice fat commission as the middleman," I said. "How much are they paying you, Marcus? What's your cut of the deal?" His face reddened slightly. "Bingo. Sarah." My mother took my hand, her eyes pleading. "I know it's hard, but think about the family. Marcus ensured we would all be well compensated." "Family?" I pulled my hand away. "The real family is out there, Mom. Pete, who taught my daughter how to ride. Susan from accounting. who has worked with us for 20 years. Old Joe, who knows every inch of this land better than any Synthagra satellite ever could. At that moment, I heard the familiar rumble of Pete's tractor approaching. It was time for our daily team meeting, where we discussed the day's tasks, a meeting that, apparently, would be one of the last. By the way, Marcus added, checking his watch again, don't mention any of this to the workers yet. We need to keep up appearances until the paperwork is finalized. The old barn was packed. Employees, contractors, even a few neighboring farmers who had heard about the emergency meeting. The scent of hay and aged wood mixed with the tension in the air. Everyone, I began, standing on an old toolbox. I have something important to tell you. I laid it all out. The plan, Marcus, Synthagra, the impending sale of the farm. I watched faces pale, heard whispers of concern. Maria Martinez gripped her husband's hand. Old Joe took off his hat, his eyes glistening. But I didn't call. You all here just to give bad news, I continued, opening my father's will. I called because I have a plan. Lisa Chen, my lawyer, stepped forward. Mr. Anderson's will has a special clause. The farm can only be sold if there is unanimous approval from the family board. And more importantly, any employee with over 10 years of service has the right of first refusal to purchase shares. A murmur spread through the barn. Pete was the first to understand. You mean... Exactly, I smiled. Out of the 30 employees here, 18 have been with us for over 10 years. By law, you all have priority if you want to buy a stake in the farm. But we don't have the money to buy shares, Susan protested. You don't need to, Lisa explained. The clause allows payment to be made through work already completed. Every year worked counts as capital, and there's more, I added. Over the past 5 years, we implemented a profit-sharing program that was never officially registered, adding that to your years of service. You already own 45% of the farm, Lisa finished. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, old Joe started to laugh. You clever girl, he said, tears rolling down his wrinkled face. Your father would be proud. There's one more thing you all need to see, I announced, opening my old leather folder, the one Dad gave me on my first day as farm manager. For 2 years, Marcus wasn't just planning to modernize the farm. He was actively sabotaging small farmers in the region. I spread dozens of letters, reports, and bank records across the table. Every document told a sordid piece of the story. Marcus isn't just a consultant for Synthagra, I continued. He's responsible for what they call strategic acquisitions, or in simpler terms, forcing family farms into bankruptcy. Marcus took a step forward, his face now pale. How did you get this? You're not the only one with connections, cousin. The difference is, mine have a conscience. Lisa began explaining each document. Synthagra has an interesting track record. 18 family farms bought out in the last 5 years, all following the same pattern. Promises of modernization, mass layoffs, and then conversion into fully automated operations. That's how the market works, Marcus tried to argue. Evolution is inevitable. Evolution? Old Joe stood up, leaning on his cane. My father taught your father how to plant on this land, Marcus. You know what real evolution is? It's learning to respect the soil, to understand the cycles, to work with nature, not against it. My mother flipped through the documents in silence, her hands trembling with each new revelation. Reports detailing how Synthagra planned to divide our land, cancel contracts with local producers, dismantle decades of family farming. Catherine, Marcus made one last attempt. Think about the money. Synthagra is offering a fortune. And how much is a family worth, Marcus? She finally spoke, her voice low but firm. How much does it cost to destroy the legacy my husband built? She turned to me, tears in her eyes. Sarah, all this time, you were protecting your father's dream, weren't you? No, Mom. I answered softly. I was protecting our family. All of them. I gestured to the crowded room. This is the real Anderson Farm family. 3 months have passed since that meeting. Anderson Farm didn't just survive Synthegra's attempted takeover. It thrived like never before. With the longtime employees now as shareholders, every decision became a true family decision. Marcus disappeared back to Chicago the next day, taking his dreams of million-dollar commissions with him. The last we heard, Synthegra fired him. Apparently, failing to deliver a guaranteed farm didn't sit well with the executives. But the real transformation happened within our own family. For the first time since my father's passing, my mother became actively involved in the farm, not in spreadsheets or meetings, but in the daily lives of our workers' families. Just last week, I found her teaching Susan's granddaughter how to bake the apple pies Dad loves so much. Old Joe started a mentorship program, passing his traditional knowledge to the younger generation. Technology is good, he always says, but the land doesn't respond to algorithms. It responds to care and respect. We expanded the family farming program, opening up parts of our land for small local producers to use. The families Marcus wanted to push out are now partners in our success. At our last shareholder meeting, something that now takes place monthly during a community barbecue in the barn, we approved the creation of an education fund for employees' children. The dream of education I started years ago is now permanently written into the farm's charter. Yesterday, as I watched the sun set over the wheat fields, I came across the old sign my father placed at the farm's entrance. Land is more than property, the inscription reads. It's the future we plant today. Marcus never understood that. To him, Anderson Farm was just numbers on a spreadsheet, dollars in a bank account. He didn't see the stories written in every furrow of the soil, the lives intertwined in every harvest, the future growing in every planted seed. Dad was right. Land is more than property. It's family, it's community, it's the legacy we choose to build together. And now, with every employee also being an owner, that legacy is safer than ever. Anderson Farm isn't just a farm, it's proof that when people come together for something they believe in, not even the biggest corporations can destroy what we've built. This land is our story, and it will remain so for generations to come.